Welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Loudmouth Luke, and today we're looking at something a little out of the wheelhouse, at least in comparison to what we looked at so far. So far, we've looked at mostly alternative rock acts such as Panic at the Disco and 21 Pilots, so today I felt like we should do something a little different. In light of his passing recently, I felt like it would be interesting to take a look at the, sort of, self-titled debut solo album of former Kiss guitarist Ace Frehley. But before we do, I think it would be best to talk about Kiss and my experience with the band. You wanted the best, you got the best. Kiss is one of the most commercially successful rock bands, and in a lot of respects, one of the most influential rock bands of all time. Often when I hear Kiss's music, I think of my dad because he really enjoys their stuff, and he helped me get into them when I was about 15 by showing me a lot of their biggest hits. And for a while, Kiss was one of my favorite bands. I always just found their music really fun to listen to. I always thought their aesthetic was super cool with all the makeup and stuff, and their overemphasis on the stage show, it makes me really regret not seeing them on the farewell tour they went on a couple years ago, because that would have been such a blast. However, as I get older, the style of rock that bands like Kiss did becomes less and less appealing to me as I get older, perhaps because a lot of times it feels like they emphasize the aesthetic and the stage performance more than the actual music, but even then, I still think most of Kiss's biggest hits are still really good songs. I asked my dad what the best Kiss album was, and he said Destroyer, which I do know the singles from that album, or at least most of the big ones like Detroit Rock City, God of Thunder, Beth, Shout It Out Loud, and I like those songs still, and after listening to the album, I thought it was okay. It's got some fun songs, but as a whole, all the songs I didn't really know didn't leave much of an impact on me. In regards to the album we're looking at today, Ace Frehley's first album is a part of 4 albums released in 1978, where each member of Kiss released a solo album, and it was supposed to be this big set because when you got them all together, they all had all the faces so you could hang them up on your wall or something, which, wow. Kiss emphasizing marketing over music? No way. Last night, I did listen to Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, and a bit of Peter Criss's albums, and they're interesting. Paul Stanley's stuff mainly just sounded like regular Kiss. There wasn't really a lot of creativity in the sound department, but there's some good songs on there. Gene's is weird because his stage persona is the demon, right? So you'd expect some hard rocks and heavy metal, but no, it's mostly laid back classic rock, akin to something like All Right Now by Free. Peter Criss's is shockingly the most interesting of the 4. While I didn't necessarily like it or hate it, it had this sort of soul rock inspired sound, but he's the drummer, so that does make sense. And with all this in mind, I wasn't really sure of what to expect with Ace's album. I didn't really know what his voice sounded like, and since he was the lead guitarist of Kiss, I really paid attention to the guitar work. Ace's album is also considered the best of the 4, and according to many sources, he was one of the only 4 members trying to prove himself as a solo artist, so I was expecting a lot going in. So let's figure out if this album's going to shock me. This is Ace Frehley's Self-Titled. The first track is Rip It Out, and I really like this one. First and foremost, I have to say, I love Ace's voice. It has kind of this cool, raspiness or roughness to it. It gives it that rock star edge. So vocally, I think I have a pretty good first impression. While researching Kiss and a bit of this album, I learned that Gene and Paul wanted Kiss to be kind of like a hard rock equivalent to the Beatles, in the sense that they wanted each member to sing, but Ace really didn't want to. I've heard it's because he was insecure or he wasn't interested. There's a lot of conflicting reports, but honestly, I don't know why. He sounds great on here. The rest of the track is pretty good too. The lyrics seem to be about some kind of a breakup, but I don't know. I don't really pay attention to the lyrics of a lot of songs from this era or this style of rock because that's not really the main focus. Regardless, I do really like the instrumentation. It's a very simplistic hard rock song, but it sounds great. I especially love the super cool drum fill break before the solo kicks in. And like I mentioned previously, since Ace Frehley was the lead guitarist of Kiss, I was really excited to hear some of the solo work because aside from a handful of songs, I didn't really know many Kiss solos because that wasn't really a main focus in a lot of the songs of them I knew. But man, this is a ripping guitar solo. It didn't disappoint in any capacity. It's super simple, but it's super effective. I like the little staccatos in the beginning, and then it gets revisited near the end of the solo, so I thought that was a little nice touch. Overall, this album is going out swinging with a super fun and guitar-filled track as the lead, so I'm excited to see how the next track stacks up. The next track is Speedin' Back to My Baby, and it's another fun rock jam. I honestly think I like this one a little more than Rip It Out. It hits you in the face with this super awesome dual guitar solo, and overall, the rest of the track has kind of a bluesy vibe. In a way, it reminds me of stuff like ZZ Top. And it's a track with another super awesome solo, and in comparison, the solo's a little more blues influence, which I think is cool. And I also like that the ending kind of circles back to the intro riff. It's really nice. The lyrics of the song seem to be about Ace trying to get back to his girlfriend, I'm assuming, by driving really fast, but once again, just like the last song, the lyrics aren't really a focus for me here. But with all that said, I think it's a really fun track, so let's keep going. The next track is Snowblind, and this is another fave from the album. It's probably my favorite song, period. For some reason, the instrumental kind of reminds me of something akin to a polished version of an early Black Sabbath, which, funnily enough, there's a Black Sabbath song called Snowblind from their 4th album, but regardless, I hear that a lot from the guitar work in the song. I feel like if it was mixed a little differently, it could straight up sound like Black Sabbath. Just like the other two tracks, I really like the solo in this song, but this one kind of has like this Chuck Berry meets Jimmy Page kind of feel to it, which I think is really cool. I also really like the line, "Feel like I'm lost in space." I don't know if that was intentional or not, but for those who don't know, in Kiss, Ace was known as the Spaceman, so I think that's a nice little detail. It's a super fun track, and I'd recommend this song if you were going to check out any of the songs from the album, so let's get to the next one. The next track is Ozone, and it's okay. It doesn't really leave much of an impression on me. But with that said, it does have a different vibe from all the other songs we've heard so far. The instrumental has kind of a theatric feel to it, at least as much as a hard rock song can sound theatric, if that makes any sense. And I know that Kiss is a pop hard rock band, but man, this song feels so repetitive, and not in a way that's like cool. There's not really a second verse. It's not really done in a different way that keeps me enticed. It doesn't really do a lot for me, although I do think the solo in the middle of the track is really cool. It's fine, but it's nothing really to write home about, so let's get to the next one. The next track is What's on Your Mind, and I do like this one a little bit more than Ozone, but it does kind of have the same problem for me in the sense that it's a little too repetitive. I do like the instrumental of the track, and in a lot of ways it reminds me of a lot of the songs on the first Kiss album. So it does have a nice instrumental, but in places it does feel a little half-baked. I like what I assume is a 12-string guitar in the background, and I do like the solo going on during the final chorus. So it does have a little bit going for it, but in comparison to the first 3 tracks, it doesn't leave much of an impression on me. With that being said, I think it's a decent track, so let's get to the next one. The next track is New York Groove, and it's the biggest hit of all the 4 Kiss solo albums and the biggest hit of Ace Frehley's solo career. And overall, I think it's a fun track, but like a lot of the other songs on here, it doesn't really do a lot for me. Something I learned was that this was a cover of a song by the band Hello, which was released a couple years prior to this album. I listened to it and it's nearly identical, but it sounds like there's an accordion in the instrumental in the original track, which is not in the Ace Frehley version. It's a super simplistic and almost poppy song in ways, although I do like the key change after the first chorus. However, the chorus takes up almost 70% of the song, so that does leave a lot to be desired for me. I feel like Ace really should have tried to make this song his own, maybe given it like a cool guitar solo or something, but it's almost verbatim the original, so that's a little underwhelming for me. That's the type of cover I don't really like for the most part, so once again, it's not bad, it just doesn't really do a lot for me, and it's surprising to me that this was the biggest hit of any of these albums. It's so wild to me that a song that Ace Frehley wrote wasn't his biggest hit, because like Rip It Out and Snowblind are so much fun to listen to, so it's a little surprising to me that this was the biggest hit. But with all that being said, I do think it's a decent track, but like I previously said, it just doesn't really do a lot for me, so let's get to the next one. The next song on the album is I'm in Need of Love, and I like this one almost as much as the first 3 tracks. Just like those 3, it's a more straightforward rock track, but it's nothing too crazy. I will say I do really like the delay effect and some of the guitar parts on the song, but just like the other songs on the album, for me it's a little too repetitive and redundant, and there isn't really a lot of variety in the lyrics for me to look past its repetition. Of course, you know, it's funny, I listen to like pop punk and I'm complaining about repetition on a hard rock album, but like, I don't know, that's just a weird thing for me. Regardless, like most of the songs on the album, I think my favorite part of the track is the solo. It's super vibrant and it's super fun. And overall, I do think it is a pretty good track, so let's get to the next one. Second to last track on the album is Wiped Out, and I actually really like this one. It starts off with a super cool like tribal drum beat, and it kicks in with an energetic guitar riff that almost reminds me of The Who in a way. It has kind of this bluesy swing rhythm in the chorus, which was a little jarring on the first few listens, but it does fit with the lyrics in the chorus since it makes me feel like I'm being wiped out, so to speak. This track might even have my favorite solo on the album. It's super fuzz-filled, and it sounds super epic despite being so short in comparison to the other solos on the album. I think it's a pretty good track, so let's see if this album goes out with a bang. The final song on the album is Fractured Mirror, and it's easily the most interesting song on the album since it's the only track that's strictly an instrumental. It starts off with this very somber acoustic 12-string guitar plucking before overdriven guitars kick in, but even then, they're a lot more controlled and not as in-your-face as a lot of the other guitar work on the rest of the album. The track has a lot more of a theatric feel in comparison to the other songs, almost being like an encore song for the album, which is not exactly something I'm opposed to, but it isn't really the way I would have ended the album. It feels more like an interlude track more than anything, despite it being the longest song on the album. It's not a bad way to end the album, but knowing a lot of the other songs on the album being all loud and rocky and in your face, it does feel kind of like an anticlimactic way to end it. But with that said, I do think it does its job fine enough. Ace Frehley's debut solo album was a fun listen, and I do feel like Ace succeeded in proving himself as a solo artist. Most of the songs are super energy filled, and it shows off his craftsmanship as a songwriter and as a guitarist. Especially in the solo department, man, do some of these solos rip. Although at times I do think the album is a little repetitive for my liking, it is very fun to listen to. My biggest critique, and this also applies to a lot of other rock music in the vein of stuff like Kiss, lyrically the songs don't really do a lot for me, and of course that's not really the main focus. The point of the music is just to be fun to listen to and maybe have some cool instrumentation. But again, a lot of times I really resonate with music that has lyrics about subjects I can relate to, or at least I feel the emotion of the artist, and a lot of hard rock like Kiss for me doesn't really do that for the most part. But with that said, that doesn't stop me from enjoying music like that. With all of that in mind, Ace Frehley's solo album gets a 7 out of 10. It's a fun album, but a lot of the tracks kind of blend in and can be a little forgettable, and don't really have a lot of replay value for me. Well, that wraps up another episode of For the Record. I hope you all enjoyed the episode, and I hope you all have a good night. And last thing before I go, I just have to say, rest in peace to the spaceman, Ace Frehley.